Hello, friends of Studio Brule. This is Steve Brule, and it's coffee time, where we go over some of the stuff that's been going on in the world and coming across my desk. Welcome to Blake Zier's Make More, and Blake Zier says, make more videos about living in the DR. I do have a couple on the plate, I just haven't got them finished yet. These will be prepared videos. I did one live stream, I think, where I talked about and showed the life in the DR and showed some photos. So, and there are a few on the prepared videos on the channel too. So have a look at those while I try to get back to some editing on my other material. Today, we're going to talk about the first days of darkness. As some of you know, regular viewers know, I am calling this the Biden's inauguration as the beginning of the 1,000 years of darkness. And the reason for that is that Trump was the last and strongest and only major figure in the world standing between the elite and their desired one world government. Biden is a committed globalist. He's been in and deep state and in this game for, I don't know, 45 years or something like that. He's a puppet. He's well owned, and he will push through everything that the globalists want and need to create a one world government, which they want to facilitate their power, the exercise of power and control and business throughout the planet. So with no further ado, let's get into this. Oh, did I say? Yes, the first days of darkness, / tightening the noose. And this is what they are doing straight out of the gate as Biden's inauguration. And let me just get to the next section here. Why is this not closing? Okay. First thing I'm going to talk about is, let's make sure I've got the right material up here. Some things to start. No, that's not even what I wanted to do first. So let me get this back out here. This is the material I wanted to start with. And some warm-up material. Stuff that I've been tweeting and background to give you a sense of what's been happening in the last week or so since the Biden inauguration. And you've probably heard me say this before, it's now a badge of honor to be called a conspiracy theorist. I really do believe that. The amount and number and degree, size of the lies that the mainstream media have been telling us is staggering. And anyone who then tries to explain the carryings on that the issues in the world without bowing to the mainstream media narrative is immediately called a conspiracy theorist, as we've often said. And that is a badge of honor because they're not being honest with us. There's an agenda they're playing to, and we are pawns. We are used, abused, and manipulated in this whole process. Mainstream media is complicit in that plan. Someone has now identified the opposite of a conspiracy theorist, and this, I think, puts clarity to what it means to be a conspiracy theorist and not a conspiracy theorist. Those of you who out of hand dismiss conspiracy theorists, quote, who are actually trying to explain what's going on in the world, not explainable by the mainstream media's narrative, they are rightfully known as complicity theorists. I liked this term right away because they are really complicit and gullible in swallowing hook, line, and sinker the narrative presented to them as if there are no people in the world with an agenda. As if these super powerful elite are just happily going on with the world, not pulling the strings they have at their fingertips. Come on. What person with those kinds of power is not going to exercise their influence in the world? They are. And let me tell you this. Do you really want me to believe, and I don't believe this, but they really imply to believe that these people are up front and they're just laying their true plan right out in front of you and there's no hidden agendas? What kind of a business person lays his entire business plan right out to his enemies? What kind of a person in politics just tells their opponents exactly what they're going to do and with no follow-up plan or no strategy from behind the scenes? Who goes into a debate without a strategy? And who tells all of their opponents what their strategy is ahead of time? Nobody does that. Nobody. Nobody in this entire planet does that. You don't go into a court case or a litigation or a defense and tell your entire opponent exactly everything your strategy is and all your thoughts before you start. No, you lay it out. And this is what they're doing. They're laying out a trap. And they have pretty much secured the trap by stealing the election from Trump. So let's see what this definition of a complicity theorist is. These are people who swallow everything hook, line, and sinker. Let's read this. This is not my creation. I just saw this. I can't remember where, either on Facebook or on Twitter. So I captured it and retweeted it. A complicity theorist is a person who accepts the political narrative of the day unquestioningly. Consumes mainstream media like it was 1980. Well, I'm not so strong on that one. I don't think it was ever all that much different in 1980. There was all kinds of behind the scenes. That's always been with us since the beginning of civilization. There are powerful people working their plans behind the scenes. And it is prone to submissiveness, outbursts of irrational fear, and public shaming of free thinkers. Most certainly all of those things. But it didn't start in 1980, after 1980. There have been conspiracies around since the very beginning of the planet Earth, or the beginning of humanity. And Troll with a Purpose says, I didn't even buy media in 1980 and I was only 10. Well, you were well ahead of the game then, that's for sure. I don't even think I paid attention to anything in the news until I was probably almost 30. So let's carry on a little bit here. And here, another thing that came up on my channel this week. I was looking at the reasons for limited ads or demonetizing of my videos. And this one's really interesting because if you look here, it says the reason for is sensitive issues, and it includes controversial social issues. In other words, on YouTube, they reserve the right to deplatform, or rather demonetize your video if it contains controversial social issues. Of course, it's not controversial if you hold up the severed head of Donald Trump during his reign in power, but it's controversial now. What they say, any controversial social issue you discuss on YouTube is subject to demonetization. Of course, they're only going to do that on one side of the political spectrum for some opinions. But if you can't discuss controversial social issues, what can you discuss? I mean, somebody's going to have offense with saying that the weather is nice out today. But that's about all you can left with on YouTube if they reserve this power. Controversial social issues. Anything worth talking about in social issues is going to be controversial. Otherwise, you're just parroting what the leaders of the day are saying, what YouTube says you can say. So that's the extent, or the degree to which YouTube is pushing all of this censorship. Now this one, this is just a quick tweet. This fella here said, and this just burned my bonnet, I guess. I had to respond to him. And he said in Twitter, too much toxic masculinity today. I just want women to lead. Just listen to that. Toxic masculinity, feminism 101. And I just want women to lead. This is coming from a man. I had to respond to him. This is the most pathetic I want my mommy cry I've ever seen from a grown man. And actually, I still stand by that. I'm actually trying to cut back on being kind of excessively critical or personally attack people on Twitter and Facebook and try to stick to the issues. But this one, I just couldn't resist. Read that again. Too much toxic masculinity today. I just want women to lead. So in other words, being a woman is all the criteria he needs. So yes, that is a pathetic, I want my mommy cry from a grown man. Here's the guy right here. He's got a public Twitter following, and have a look at this. This kind of guy that cries out for his mommy and wants women to lead has 148,000 followers on Twitter. How does that happen? Who are the people that follow somebody like that? I don't get it. Let's carry on. Reality check. This I just thought I had. I think it was this morning. I threw this out there because I think this is, to me it seems an important thing to remind people of. Reality check. Justin Trudeau did not build COVID-19 concentration camps just to use them for a few months and then abandon them. They are already hyping up the fear of the new COVID variants. The elite are digging in for the long haul. And I believe that's true. The police in Toronto, at least, are getting more aggressive with innocent Canadian citizens. There is, in fact, I tweeted about this, but I don't think I screen capped it. They have secret COVID cells. They've turned some buildings in Toronto into these holding places, and Rebel News talked about this. And if you're interested in it, have a look at Rebel News. They interviewed a guy who was held in one of these things, and he said for 2 weeks you are locked in the room, and they come to you. You only open your door 5 times a day. It's solitary confinement, folks. Solitary confinement against your will on the government's choice. When they decide they don't like your quarantine plan, they can do this. The guy who they interviewed on Rebel News said that they came to his door. It was locked from the outside, so he can't get out of the room. The windows are all locked shut. And he said they come to your door 5 times a day. 3 Salvation Army meals, which from the sense I got from him, they're not very good, per day. And then 2 extra times a day to check your temperature with one of those guns at your forehead. This is what we've come to, folks. These are innocent people locked against their will in solitary confinement in Canada. They only open your door with the authorities 5 times a day, check your temperature, and give you some kind of sloppy gruel that you probably can't stomach anyways. This is a totalitarian state. Canada cannot say it's a free country. We hadn't been able to say that for a long time, but this is a military-style, locked-down totalitarian state. If I go back to Canada as a Canadian, and they look at my quarantine plan for 2 weeks and they say, you know, we don't like this, they will lock me in one of those rooms for 2 weeks, only opening the door 5 times a day to take your temperature and throw some crappy unedible food at you. That is solitary confinement of innocent Canadian citizens. And don't think that this isn't coming to the U.S. Biden is no better than Trudeau. Let's carry on. The U.S., in this tweet, the U.S. is following Canada's lead. Only state-authorized media, this is referring to the media because Canada, the Liberal government of Canada gives money to just about all the mainstream media in Canada, so they all just bow down and praise Trudeau. Only state-authorized media will be permitted. The U.S. and Canadian mainstream journalism is dead and rotting in the streets. The stench is already unbearable. To me it is anyways. And this is coming from Matthew Keys. The White House says it will work with news organizations to develop a new set of standards for issuing media passes, with officials showing lack of tolerance for conspiracy theory outlets. Imagine that. Now they're only let in their pre-authorized media to give them nice little questions like what color are the napkins at the inauguration? And then there'll be spoon-fed questions. I did tweet about this, and this is the reference. If you look for this tweet on my channel, you'll see my Twitter feed, you'll see the Rebel News interview with the fellow who was in these confinement camps. Secret solitary confinement of innocent Canadians by the Canadian government. And they are already ramping up fear to justify round 2 of new coronavirus variants. Now let's move on to Biden. He orders illegals to be counted in census. This article is worth reading too. It looks to me like the borders of the U.S. are really already wide open. And this is just the start. Look at this date here. That's his first full day of as President of the United States. Biden orders illegals to be counted in census. I'm guessing that means that anybody who happens to be in the U.S. at the time of an election can probably go and vote. That doesn't mean these votes are going to be any different than they were the last vote. They've already established their ability and will to steal elections. So I'm not sure it even matters anymore. We've entered into the 1,000 years of darkness. Biden in his, again, second day on the job, January 22nd. Biden kills up to 70,000 jobs on first day in office. And that in a time when so many people are struggling. It's amazing to see this, but there it is. And Justin Trudeau gets a call from Biden as Canada and U.S. mend relations. This is the New York Times. Canada and the U.S. mend relations. Don't get too quick there, New York Times, because Biden right away killed the Keystone XL pipeline. A pipeline that had many, many thousands of high-paid jobs, and the spin-offs from it were enormous. And this in a time when the U.S. is in difficult times with lost jobs and the coronavirus lockdown still in place, and the same thing going on in Canada. And yet the New York Times has the nerve to say Canadians welcome a renewed relationship with the United States after tolerating 4 years of insults and threats from the Trump administration. I hate to tell you, New York Times, but Canadians in general are not welcoming a renewed relationship with the United States, not after the cancellation with the Keystone Pipeline. In fact, the best relations that Canada and the U.S. have ever had is when both countries had conservative parties in power. That means the Republicans in the U.S. and the Conservatives in Canada. The last time that happened was in would be in George Bush's second term with Prime Minister Stephen Harper in place. And the Canadian government and the U.S. government relations were actually quite good. I'm not sure leftists can ever really have that good of relationships, but I could be wrong. They may be singing and holding hands all the way to their one world government. And look at this here from this Catherine portrait, Toronto. We're friends again. I think this was in CBC or something like that. We're friends again. Look, most Canadians never stop being friends with Americans. That's just nonsense. And Trump was better for Canada than the leftists have ever been. And here we go with Fauci again. Fauci says corona cases may be plateauing. This is on Biden's second day in office. Do you read the date there? I don't see the date. But this I captured off of Twitter, and it's a Breitbart tweet. Corona cases may be plateauing. Guess why? We're going to have a look at that right now. Rebel News reported the World Health Organization updates PCR test guidelines on Biden's first day. Incredible. We talked about this on this channel months ago. The PCR test, they were running cycles. I suspect they were ordered. The testing sites were ordered to run these cycles too long. Everybody knew that they were running these cycles too long. Elon Musk tweeted that he got a 50-50 response on 4 tests, 2 positive and 2 negative. The reason that all people in that area of biology know is that if you run PCR test cycles long enough, it's going to pick up everything and anything, and you're going to have a lot of false positives. But that's what they wanted from day one. Even the CDC ordered all kinds of people with even symptoms suspected of coronavirus, even when they had a motorcycle accident, to cause of death coronavirus. They did the same trick with the PCR. It's a more sophisticated trick. But what do the new guidelines do? And coincidentally, those new guidelines come in on Biden's first day. And Fauci tweets the PCR cases may be plateauing on the same day. Read this with me. The World Health Organization has updated their instructions on how to properly use PCR tests for the detection of COVID-19. Such a coincidence. There's just so many coincidences since this whole pandemic started. It's unbelievable. Reading from the top. Dr. David Samadi, a certified urologist and contributor to Newsmax, suggested that the changes were encouraging labs across the world to reduce their cycle count for PCR testing, stating that, quote, the current cycle was much too high, and that this was, quote, resulting in any particle being declared a positive case. Isn't that something? They knew that. The World Health Organization knew that. Let's read from the top. They knew that from the start, but they wanted to inflate the case numbers, the statistics. Reading from the top with me. The WHO notice concluded by suggesting that, quote, most PCR assays are indicated as an aid for diagnosis. Therefore, healthcare providers must consider any result in combination with timing of sampling, specimen type, assay specifics, clinical observations, patient history, confirmed status of any contacts, and epidemiological information. Now, they weren't doing that prior to the election. They were just taking every possible positive PCR test and ramping up the fear. Now, they're trying to ramp it down because, of course, Biden has to be a hero. Whoops, now this is not going forward again. Okay, here we go. Still not going forward. Okay, bear with me a second. This thing locks up every once in a while, and I have to go back and find it again open it up again. And where were we? Okay. Get back here to this one. All right. Now we get back onto the Toronto Police Force and how they are abusing people in the street in Canada. Again, innocent citizens. Let's read what their top priority. Public safety is our top priority, says the Toronto Police. The COVID-19 pandemic is not just a public health issue, it is a public safety issue. And you remember in this channel I always very frequently talk about how safety is the excuse to take away freedoms. It's a public safety issue. The emergency orders are clear. Gatherings of more than 5 people are not permitted. Participating in large gatherings, including protests, is not just in contravention of these orders, but also puts attendees and the broader community at risk. When these events happen, police will be present and prepared to respond appropriately. There's that name. This actually is a public health issue, but they've decided to label it a public safety issue. And with safety, they can eliminate your freedoms in the name of safety. Let's move on. Ezra Levant responded to this, and let me put you and the Toronto Police Service operations on notice. If you touch any of our reporters, we will sue you. Gun crime is at a record high, but you're targeting peaceful citizens and reporters documenting your brutality. You really learned nothing from the G20. The G20 was a gathering of the G20 countries in Toronto some possibly 20 years ago now, and there was a lot of police violence at that time. And here, the Daily Mail says, Douglas Murray, and this was printed on January 23rd, just a few days ago. The left can't stop fawning over Joe Biden, but I fear this won't end well for America or Britain. Well, you're right, Douglas, it won't end well for anybody in those countries except the elite. And in fact, it's not just America or Britain or Canada, it's the whole world is going to pay the price for this stolen election. Let's read from the top. Never mind that the U.S. economy has in the past year been wrecked by COVID pandemic. There we go again. Even so fairly intelligent people are saying that the economy has been wrecked by the COVID pandemic. I got to repeat this every time I say it to remind people. The COVID virus did not destroy one damn thing. It's taken a few lives, that's true, as a health issue. But the COVID pandemic did not hurt the economy whatsoever. Lockdowns did. Lockdowns made by the decisions of the elite and by people like Bill Gates, who lobbied for those lockdowns to the tune of $500 million, and he's only one. Bill Gates, who then insisted that the lockdowns would have to stay in place until everybody in the world is vaccinated. Bill Gates, who knew darn well that these lockdowns would cause hunger and famine around the world, which they have. And reports are saying that they're expecting hundreds of millions of people dying of hunger in the world as a result of these lockdowns. Bill Gates, who has been preparing for this since 2014 by buying up farmland all across the U.S. Bill Gates is the largest single owner of farmland in the U.S. Bill Gates lobbied for famine and hunger in the world, and he got it because he is one of the biggest farmland owners. Bill Gates, who is part of influencing the World Economic Forum's Great Reset, one of which their plans is to tax the middle class higher and higher and transfer that wealth to the third world, not to the third world governments. I'll guarantee you that money is not going to governments in the third world. Bill Gates and his friends have bought and started up companies in the third world which are going to receive your tax dollars. These wealthy elites who have doubled their wealth in the past year on these lockdowns that they lobbied for are going to double their wealth again by taxing you and sending that money to their companies in the third world. This is just the start. But here, these so-called journalists keep blaming the COVID pandemic. The COVID pandemic did and does nothing to the economy. The COVID pandemic, the lockdowns in which the fear for your safety is used as an excuse to destroy the economy. Let's read on. That unemployment has soared and that homelessness on a developing world scale is now visible in many American cities. There is also a simple question of competence. First of all, the competence of remembering that these lockdowns, these decisions of the elite caused the destruction of the economy and all the misery you're talking about. Reading from the top with me. During my recent tours of the U.S., I spoke to many Democrats who admitted to deep misgivings in private. They knew about Biden's forgetfulness, his wandering trains of thought, and his ever more obvious mental frailty. Many doubted he would make it through a full term in office. Look, I don't know about you guys, but I am quite certain that Biden's frailty on all fronts, physical and mental, are what they like about him. They don't care. They just want Biden to do what he's told and then get him out of the way and put Kamala Harris in there, who's the most ruthless tyrant in politics in American history today. Kamala Harris will have absolutely no qualms about gutting the middle class, putting millions of people into poverty and starvation, and opening up the borders to a one-world government. That's why they picked her, even though she was one of the least popular of all presidential candidates in the primaries. This is not, they don't have, well, maybe you're talking to low-level Democrats, but the high-level Democrats did this for a reason. They don't do anything like that by accident. Let's read on. Reading from the top with me. Take the fawning treatment of new Vice President Kamala Harris. The American broadcasters, like the BBC here, seem to be in love. One, quote, tough TV interview with her spent agonizing minutes quizzing her about her taste in comfortable shoes. We can expect much more of this in the next 4 years. We sure can. The media is left. There's no surprise. Anyone who's paid any attention whatsoever to the media's relationship with the Democrat Party cannot pretend to be surprised at this. This is going to be a rehash of the leftist media's love affair with Obama. They're going to help the president and the Democrat Party out of their holes they dig and the problems they create as they move towards a one world government. They're on board with it. So let's not pretend that this was not foreseeable. This was 100% foreseeable. In fact, we talked about it on this channel, I think. Reading from the top. Given that Harris may well become president during the next 4 years, you can count on that. I wonder what the Las Vegas odds are on that. The next 4 years is guaranteed for me. I'm questioning whether it's going to be in the next 4 months. Reading onward. It is quite stunning that the American media have done almost no digging into what she actually thinks. No, they don't. And they're not even reporting very strongly on what she did in California. The way she hid exculpatory evidence and kept men in jail in work gangs long past when they shouldn't have been proven innocent. She hid evidence. She hid evidence on people on death row until after they were executed. This is a deeply evil person with absolutely no conscience, and she can decimate the middle class, the country. She can cause wars, famine, and she will sleep quite well. She won't miss 1 minute of sleep. She'll celebrate it with an extra bottle of ultra-expensive champagne. This is an evil woman. Let's read onwards here. There is something of the late Roman Empire about this, the arrogance of a ruling elite in terminal decline. The world's most powerful man gets into office at a time of unprecedented crisis, and one of his first priorities is to ensure that men who identify as women should be allowed to use female changing rooms and pulverize any woman he comes across in competitive sports, all in the name of equality, obviously. Well, that is a good sentence, a good paragraph. It is very much like late Roman Empire in decline, except that there is a reason for this. These elite who run the world, the Bezos of the world and people in behind the scenes, they want the U.S. in decline. They stole the election. They are agents of destruction. This is not an accident. They need the U.S. weakened so that they can strengthen the world demand for a one world government. And what I'll be surprised is if we don't have a strong one world government by the end of 4 years. I don't know how long it'll take to bring it in, but they're pushing and pushing right out of the gate. So if I had if there was a bet in Las Vegas and I was a betting man, I'd bet that there will be a one world government. The U.S. borders will be seriously weakened, and a lot of power will be transferred from every country in the world and put into the hands of the one world government, which really will be under the influence of the super powerful elite. Okay. By the way, how is the sound volume on the channel there? Give me some feedback. I know somebody is saying don't shout here. I don't know if my volume is too high on the channel. But I'm going to keep on going here for now, and do give me a comment or two in the channels, on the comments. Reading onwards. As one Conservative MP admitted last week, the trade deal that was being negotiated between the UK and the US while Trump was in office is now in trouble. The steam has gone out of it. That's not hard to figure out why, folks. Remember, the UK was trying to get independent of Europe with the Brexit, and as part of that, they were reaching out to other countries for independent trade deals with the US, I believe with Canada, and other independent nations of the world. The US is not going to cooperate with that under Biden, because the US sees Brexit as a sign that the UK might be a barrier towards pushing forward their one world government goals. They will probably use that leverage to convince the Britain to accept to maybe get out of Brexit, but go straight into the one world government where they will lose even more autonomy than they lost under the European Union. Let's read on. And this from Breitbart News on January 22nd last week. Charles Hurt says, Trump feared more now than ever. Trump is a threat, a real threat to these globalists, even out of power. The reason he's a real threat is because he has 70-some million fairly passionate supporters in the U.S. Even out of office, that is a lot of power. And that is a lot of power that he can bring to bear over the Republican Party. Especially, rumor is that he's not going to create his own separate party, but that could change any time. The fact is that Trump supporters are numerous, they're fairly passionate, and with that kind of support, yes, the Democrats are worried, especially since they know they only got into office by lying, cheating, stealing the vote. Let's read what Charles Hurt has to say. In a town where everybody gets a honeymoon, Mr. Trump was not even allowed to work one single day without the constant onslaught of distraction. Yep, that's an understatement if I ever heard it. Reading onward from the top with me. From his first moment in office, they threw everything they had at him. Even before, actually, he was in office. I remember them threatening that to get him out of office, anything, any way possible, nothing's off the table, before he was inaugurated. But let's read on. They made up lies. They launched fake inquiries, dispatched the most powerful espionage apparatus on the planet against him. They turned the entire bureaucracy, including the military, against him. And reading on. Even a global pandemic was unloosened against him in the middle of his re-election campaign. Now, I haven't come out and absolutely stated that. I've kind of hedged my bets on this because it is quite possible that this pandemic was exaggerated in its fearfulness. The hysteria was whipped up specifically to disrupt the campaign, for sure. I don't think the virus was deliberately released, but that's not off the table either. And it wasn't deliberately created for this purpose. Why would anybody create a virus? There's always viruses around. All you have to do is, when one takes hold, is just use your mainstream media to whip up hysteria. That's all they did with the COVID-19 virus. They just took what was there and whipped up the hysteria. But in any case, they did it at the beginning of the re-election campaign for a reason. Distract what was going on. Keep everybody distracted while they're stealing the election. This is clear to me. It is very clear. There's no question that the election was stolen. And I would say, in hindsight, most of the pandemic and the hysteria and all the crap and lies around this was all about smoke and mirrors to keep the attention out of the media. That's a fact. And to keep everybody's attention away from the fact that they were preparing for the biggest, worst, most criminal theft in the history of humanity, the theft of the White House. Reading from the top. That uncontrollable hatred unified a fatally fractured Democratic Party behind Washington's perfect bride, Joseph R. Biden. He's perfect because he's perfectly controllable. Let's read from the top again. Part of Mr. Biden's, quote, unity campaign apparently is to convict Mr. Trump in an impeachment trial. That's right, convict Mr. Trump, who already left office Wednesday. Reading from the top. Never before have they feared Mr. Trump more than they do right now. They fear him and his return so much that instead of addressing any of the real problems facing the country today, they would rather pursue another fake impeachment trial to bar his supporters from ever electing him again to any federal office. And they are also doing their best to vilify anybody who had anything to do or support of Trump's campaign or time in office, to unperson you, kick you out of society, make you unemployable, They're going after everybody. These are the actions of a terrified group who knows they are guilty and are terrified of getting caught at the crimes they've done. The Democratic Party is an absolute shame, a blight on humanity. It is truly evil and a totalitarian, tyrannical movement. And it's taking over the world. And that's what Trump was about, to stop it. To stop it. He was the one thing stopping the unification of all these leftist, elitists, leftist movements from around the world from bringing in their one world government. They hated him for it. Let's read onwards here. This is PM Media, I think it is. I forget the name of this media now. But anyways, it'll come to me later. Ford government silences opposing views on lockdowns. This is interesting as well. And the Ford government is nominally a conservative government. They call themselves conservatives, but in Canada, you have to remember, even the Conservative Party is further to the left than the Democrat Party in the U.S. So it's a bit of a misnomer to call them conservatives, because they're not real conservatives. In Canada, they're conservatives. But Trudeau is just about entirely a socialist party, and the Conservatives are trying to cozy up right across Canada to the Liberal government. And the reason is that Canadians themselves have become overwhelmingly socialists, communists, if you will, as well. I don't think it really matters what you call them, socialists or communists. The fact is they're collectivists. And Canadians have a collectivist mentality today. There's almost a hatred for anything conservative in Canada, to the point where even the Conservative Party is reluctant to criticize the Liberal Party in power. And we talked about that last week here. Premier Ford has failed utterly miserably to refute the anti-lockdown case presented by Roman Faber, Ontario member of Provincial Parliament of York Centre. And this is January 22nd, again, last week. Let's have a look what he says. Reading from the top with me. And this is an example of what's going on right around North America, folks, with these lockdowns. Anybody who criticizes the lockdown strategy gets cancelled, unpersoned, and kicked right out of their position, as we're going to see right here. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has failed utterly miserably to refute the anti-lockdown case presented by Roman Faber, a member of the Provincial Parliament of York for York Centre. Mr. Barber was recently kicked out of the Progressive Conservative Caucus for publicly advocating for an end to lockdowns. That's it. That's his entire crime. He publicly advocated for an end to the lockdowns. Lockdowns which are proving to be totalitarian state, military lockdown style, using the police to harass and imprison innocent Canadian citizens. This is what it's come to in Canada, the U.S.'s northern neighbor, and this is spreading throughout the Western world. Let's read from the top. The medicine is killing the patient. Ontario's hospital and the ICU capacity are better than in the last 3 years. This is true. I plead for the millions of lives and livelihoods ruined by Ontario's public health restrictions. The lockdown isn't working. It's causing an avalanche of suicides, overdoses, bankruptcies, divorces, and takes an immense toll on our children. Dozens of leading doctors implored you to end the lockdown. The lockdowns are objectively deadlier than COVID. I couldn't have said it better myself. In fact, we've been repeating this sentiment since the beginning of these lockdowns almost a year ago. The 2 weeks to flatten the curve now has turned into, and you've heard this here before, the 2 weeks to flatten the curve now has turned into 2 years to destroy the will of the people, to dispirit you, to destroy your resistance. This is the 2 years to destroy the will of the people that we're in now. This is not about flattening any curve, and it never was about flattening any curve. One tweet I read just yesterday said, imagine if a year ago they told you they were going to lock you down for a year. There would have been uproar in the streets, but these people are smart. They start with the little thing, and then they wiggle it and wiggle it, just like income tax after World War II. a temporary income tax to pay for the war effort. There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program, I think Winston Churchill said. And here we have it again. This is the permanent lockdown and control, the dictatorial control, the tyrannical control of the state over the people. And it's here, it's now, it's happening right before our eyes, and there's hardly any protests. And those who do protest get harassed, beat up by the police, and put in jail. This is what's going on in Canada, and this is what's going on in the U.S. Let's read from the top. I'm just going to take a sip of my coffee here. Reading from the top. Like too many other politicians, Premier Ford is aggressively hostile to serious public debate on the issue of whether lockdowns do more harm than good. That tells you right there how totalitarian they are. They won't even talk about it. They won't debate it. They kick out of power, out of the caucus, anyone who even tries to bring up the point. Reading onward. Premier Ford wants to limit this debate to the secret deliberations of his progressive conservative caucus meetings, where neither the media nor the public can learn about the arguments for and against lockdowns. Just think about that, folks. These lockdowns affect innocent people throughout the country, and they want to have secret deliberations about it. What kind of democracy is this? What kind of freedom is this? This is nonsense. This is as totalitarian as it gets. And yet, our culture has slided its way right into this, and only a very small percentage of us are even talking about it and complaining about it and raising the alarm. This slippery slope, well, I've said before, I don't think you can stop it anymore, because the whole purpose was for the elite to bring in the one world government, to crush the middle class, to force everybody to either work for governments or multinational corporations, which are going to be one and the same under a one world government. That's fascism. Fascism, where the one world government and the corporations are basically in bed together, crushing all the citizens. They want us all to be work slaves. Check out my video on the feminism's role in the one world government and what we can do about it for more details on that. Let's read onward. Mr. Babber, I say Barber and Babber, I'm not sure what his real name is. In the previous slide it was Barber, now it's Babber. So Mr. Barber further states that, quote, COVID is real, but the fear of COVID is exaggerated. He points to, this is exactly what I've been saying since last March. He points to well-known, let's get this over here. He points to well-known facts that are fully supported by the government's own data and statistics. Roughly 80% of COVID deaths occur in long-term care facilities, where people are, on average, in their last year of life. The virus poses no threat to children at all, and it has negligible impact on the population's life expectancy. Mr. Barber states we should focus on and fix long-term care. This is exactly what I said in the very beginning of this. We should put all of our focus and attention on protecting those who are actually at risk. Imagine if politicians actually did that. The problem is they would be disobeying their superiors in the global elite movement. But imagine if we actually put all of our attention and support on protecting the people who are actually at risk, the elderly in long-term care facilities. Incredible. It's incredible that us regular citizens have to be pointing out, and all of these so-called experts are shutting their mouths up because they're afraid to lose their cushy jobs. This is the problem with our elite experts in the world today too. Even these top doctors. Do you think a top doctor who's making, I don't know, $600,000 to $600,000 or $1 million a year or whatever, a top physician is going to open his mouth up and say, you know, these lockdowns are wrong? He doesn't want to lose his job. Even a doctor making $200,000 or $300,000 a year, he's not going to want to lose his $200,000 or $300,000 a year by opening his mouth and sticking his neck out there. No, it comes down to regular people like you and me. You can't trust any of the experts today. This is what it's coming down to. Sorry to say it. They're all bought and paid for by the elite. Every last one of them. Those who do stick their neck out, there are a few, I'll admit. There are some. And God bless them for trying. but they all get their heads cut off. The only reason my head's not getting cut off is I'm just too small a fish. None of those people out there even know I exist here on YouTube. Maybe it's a blessing that YouTube crushes my channel. I'm safe. Safe in anonymity, but I'm not going to shut my mouth. Come and cut my head off at this point in life, it hardly matters much. Let's read on. Reading from the top. Next, Mr. Baber refers to Ontario government data on intensive care units, occupancy, ICUs, pointing out that it was at 81% in December 2020 and 81% on January 4th, 2021. This is lower than the 87% and 91% in 2018, 87% in 2017, 91% in 2018, 84% in 2019 of daily average ICU occupancy in the preceding 3 years. Just let that sink in. Intensive care unit occupancy is down in this so-called pandemic. Reading onwards. Ontario's hospitals on average are not full, with occupancy ranging from 50% to 110%, according to the government's fact sheet. More significantly, the Ontario government pretends that overcrowded hospitals are a new phenomenon caused by COVID, when in fact hallway medicine has been the norm at many Canadian hospitals for many years. I can attest to that. I had to go prior to the lockdown, to emergency to get antibiotics for a bad ear infection. It was driving me out of my head. Extremely painful. I waited there over 4 hours. There was going to be another 4 to 6 hours before I could even see a doctor to get a prescription. The hospital system in Canada is terrible. You know, if you get to see an expert to treat your serious problem, you'll be treated very well. There's no doubt about that. There are good doctors in Canada, but you cannot get there. A waiting list for something like a hip replacement is 8 months to a year, if you get diagnosed by the doctor, which they're reluctant to do. To get an MRI, I've heard, or when my wife had needed one back in Canada, it could be up to a year to get an MRI, unless the diagnosing doctor has a extremely persuasive case to make to get you to jump the queue. Canadian medicine is in disarray, and it was in worse disarray before the COVID lockdown. So let's read on. Reading from the top with me. This generation of kids will grow up with an anxiety disorder and will be afraid of normal life. Kids need to be kids again, back in school with their friends. They should not believe that coming close to another child may result in someone's death. It's false and unwarranted. Absolutely. We're training these kids to be fearful. Let's move on here. And this, I should have put this up earlier. Amazon, once Biden was inaugurated, suddenly offers to assist with U.S. COVID-19 vaccine distribution. I mean, this should be a ginormous, huge red flag. Amazon are quite happy. They were quite happy under Trump to let all you U.S. citizens die. They didn't care. And I'll tell you this, they still don't care. This is not about helping anyone. These kinds of actions should make this blazingly clear. Blazingly clear. If Amazon really seriously had any concern about any people, first of all, they'd help their own workers who have had a lot of cases of COVID, but they wouldn't have waited for Biden's inauguration to offer their help in distributing vaccines. No. This is about building up supporting Biden himself in his presidency so that Biden can open up the doors of the U.S. To a one world government and more power for Jeff Bezos. That's all it's about. Let's read a little bit from that article. Amazon is offering its colossal operations network and advanced technologies to assist President Joe Biden in his vow to get 100 million COVID vaccinations to Americans in his first 100 days. Well, no help before Biden, but as soon as Biden's in, boom. That tells you everything you need to know about that tyrant. January 25th, coronavirus news. This is updated January 26th. Okay. Just this morning I read this. Read this from the top with me. About updates to the coronavirus. It will take until summer for the average healthy young American to have access to COVID-19 vaccination, a top infectious disease expert said. Okay, my first thing I want to say about that is that why does the average healthy young American need the vaccine? All the stats, this is proven, all of the stats show that there is no risk to the average healthy young American. It is virtually zero. Those average young Americans, healthy Americans, have a better chance of winning the lottery 3 times in a row and walking out the door on the 3rd time and getting hit and killed by three meteors at the same time. The level of risk for these people is zero. It's as close to zero that you can get. You can almost not measure it. And yet, this is something we're supposed to be concerned about? No. You've lost me right outside of the gate here, but let's read on. The US CDC is reviewing new data that suggests a coronavirus variant first identified in the UK could be more deadly. Of course, they're going to want they want to have some cards to play if their plans aren't going as they want them to go. They're going to need another pandemic and more emergency powers. That's all that looks like to me. President Biden will instate COVID travel restrictions on Brazil and much of Europe and add South Africa, a White House official told the CN. Got to keep the people dispirited, destroy the will of the people. And as some Mexican president, he got tested positive for COVID-19. Okay, well, that's unfortunate. Reading from the top. This is the guy who is the head coronavirus expert in the U.S. and in the world at this point, because the U.S. leads the world in these things, and he'll be leading the World Health Organization. He says double masking is likely more effective to stop the spread of COVID-19, says Fauci. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I saw the tests on the masks and how the vapors all come out from around the mask, spreading the viruses everywhere. And I also remember them saying that masks were not about protecting you from getting COVID-19, they're about protecting other people from getting exposed to your liquids from your mouth, spit and whatnot. So, how is 2 masks going to help you when the vapors and the particles and the aerosols are coming out the sides of the mask? These are just pieces of cloth loosely held over your mouth. They don't stop anything more than you using a handkerchief when you sneeze. But here it is. Director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases said on Monday that wearing 2 masks is likely more effective to stop the spread of COVID-19. And here we read from the top. Because, this is a physical covering to prevent droplets and viruses, here he says, to get in. Now the story is protecting you. Get in. But those masks, everybody knows by now that these masks are nowhere near fine enough to stop virus particles from getting in. That's nonsense. And this is coming from the top expert. So if you have a physical covering with one layer, you put on another layer on, it just makes common sense that it would likely be more effective, and that's the reason why you see people either double masking or doing a version of the N95. Well, fear is the main reason they're double masking. Fear, nothing else. Read onwards here. The White House blames Trump administration for lack of COVID-19 vaccine supply. Quelle surprise. They blame Trump for everything. It's raining in South Dakota today. Trump must have done something to hurt us. But here, take a look at this. The CDC quietly updates guidelines to say masks don't work. This was in December 26, 2020, just 1 month ago. What does the CDC say exactly? Let's read it. Exposure to, quote, this is a quote from CDC's own report release. A person with COVID-19 who has symptoms in the period from 2 days before symptom onset until they meet the criteria for discontinuing home isolation can be laboratory confirmed or clinically compatible illness. Person who has tested positive for COVID-19, comma, or rather brackets, laboratory confirmed, but has not had any symptoms in the 2 days before the date of specimen collection until they meet criteria for discontinuing home isolation. Note, this is irrespective of whether the person with COVID-19 or the contact was wearing a mask, or whether the contact was wearing respiratory personal protective equipment. So, I think I didn't quite capture enough of this because it was a preceding explanatory sentence, but you can go have a look at it. The link's in the description. In other words, your risk of catching the COVID-19 is independent of whether you're using a mask or not. And that's on the CDC website. So, where does that leave us? Let's carry on to another topic. Bear with me 1 second here. And was this the one or is this the one here? Okie dokie. Again, on with the restrictions and lockdowns and general removal of your freedoms as a result of the decision by the elites, not a coronavirus. Quarantine after international travel now required for those arriving in the U.S. This is January 21st, Biden's first day. This is following the path of the Canadian government. I don't know if you guys will end up with quarantined, or rather COVID-19 concentration camps like we already have in Kanakistan, or however you want to call it in Canada now. President Biden's latest executive order addressing COVID-19 requires international travelers to test before arriving and quarantine after landing. So much for going to conferences in the U.S. anymore. Reading from the top with me. They're going to review all these policies, but let's carry on. The review would also address COVID-19 vaccination, follow-up testing, and symptom monitoring, air filtration requirements, environmental decontamination standards, and contact tracing for travelers. Contact tracing. Well, they're going to be monitoring your every move. And if they don't like what you're doing, they're going to stick you in jail. Some freedom we have here, folks, all in the name of safety. Everybody imprisoned in the name of safety. Canada, this is CNN, working with the U.S. to close travel, quote, loophole, published the 22nd of January. All this stuff coordinated to begin as soon as Biden got in office. Let's read what it says here. Canadian officials said Friday they are working with the Biden administration to close what they describe as a travel loophole and to get more symmetry with COVID-19 safety protocols between the two countries. Quote, a loophole frankly does exist because the Americans previously had not placed any restriction on international flights coming into the U.S., Bill Blair, Canada's public safety minister, during a news conference said. When I hear something like safety minister, I really hear minister for the elimination of your freedom. Because that's what it is right now, folks. It has nothing to do about safety. It has everything to do about eliminating your freedom. Read with me from the top. With the United States not imposing any air travel restrictions from Canada, the loophole has allowed everything from Canadian snowbirds going to the warm climes of Florida and Arizona for winter to family members on both sides of the border setting up non-essential visits. Wow, non-essential visits. Non-essential visits. That sounds like something taken right out of a prison instruction form. prison guideline rules. It's not a it's a non-essential visit. You can't come until next year. Go away. We'll tell you when your 5.5 minutes of contact will be permitted. They're going to shut down travel for regular people, but you know the elite have never followed their own rules. They were found breaking their own rules as soon as they made them, and sometimes before. This is about eliminating your freedom permanently. As Winston Churchill, I believe, said, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. This is permanent. This is the beginning of the 1,000 years of darkness. Read with me from the top. International air travelers who currently enter Canada must show proof of a negative test result for COVID-19 within 72 hours of departure and are also subject to a 14-day mandatory quarantine, with violators facing stiff financial penalties. There are exceptions for essential workers. I think they misspoke there. The exceptions are for essential work slaves. The elite need the work slaves so they can get out of prison to do the work. 14-day mandatory. Remember when we read just last session that the minister looked the media in the eye and said any quarantine would be voluntary. Now it's mandatory. They just opened up. We don't even know how many of these COVID-19 concentration camps in Canada. Let's read from the top here. We could be, this is Trudeau, okay, saying this, and listen to this very carefully because this same stuff is coming to every first world country. Read this from the top with me. We could be bringing in new measures that significantly impede your ability to return to Canada at any given moment without warning, said Trudeau during a news conference Friday, adding, quote, the bottom line is this. This is not the time to travel either internationally or across the country. There's your freedoms being taken away for your safety. Folks, always remember, you should be getting this message ingrained into your brain. Tell everybody you know. For your safety is code to justify taking away your freedom. Your safety. Your safety is all important. We all need to be super safe, live super safe, long lives of desperate misery. That's what they want for us. Trudeau, I won't go back to Canada. I've said this before. I refuse to return to my own country. I'm a citizen there, but I'm not going to let them stick me in a cage and lock me up and open the front door 5 times a day to take my temperature and throw some crap food at me that I wouldn't want to eat. These are COVID concentration camps. They're sticking Canadian citizens in solitary confinement. It's confinement. Healthy, innocent citizens put in solitary confinement by our government. What else can we call it but totalitarian tyranny? It's here, it's now, it's in place. Let's read on. Reading from the top. We are looking at a number of measures that can include further restrictions on international travel, additional tracing measures, additional quarantine measures, and enforcement measures in order to de-incentivize and discourage people from making unnecessary trips. Geez. Folks, just try to remember a year ago before this started and imagine them just coming out with this stuff. And if somebody told you that this was going to be coming out in a year back then, you would have laughed in that person's face and say, you are an incredible tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. You would. And they did. People did. And they still do when we talk about these things and what's going on and what's coming to us in the West. They still call us tinfoil hats conspiracy theorists. But here it is. We talked about it then. Here it is now being put forward by the very government that all of these people trust. I don't. I never trusted Trudeau. I thought he was a fraud right from the beginning. But in any case, they're doing it. They're doing it to us now. That's why I call it the beginning of the 1,000 years of darkness. Reading from the top with me. Officials also indicated that weeks of lockdowns throughout most of Canada are slowly starting to work, with new daily cases of COVID-19 falling. Well, I can't even believe that they have the nerve to publish this stuff. You know that? I can't sometimes. These caseloads are so manipulated, these statistics. We can't believe anything that they tell us about the COVID-19. They've inflated the statistics in myriad different ways. First, from just telling you to call it a COVID death when it isn't. And now the World Health Organization reduced the cycle count to make sure that the PCR test numbers, the numbers of PCR test positives go down. And now that the media, right on board, they're just passing the puck back and forth and they're on the same team. The media then, whoops, didn't get this finished here. The media then says that weeks of lockdowns throughout Canada are slowly starting to work. Daily cases of COVID-19 are falling. Are these people, well, Canadians are mostly asleep, so it will work. But this is due to the change in the PCR test rules. Let's read down from the bottom paragraph here. This gives us hope that community-based control measures are starting to take effect, said Theresa Tam. I'm not going to call her a doctor. I don't know what she is, a doctor in fooling the public. Canada's chief public health officer. But it is still too soon to be sure that these measures are strong enough and broad enough, read that, to set us on a steady downward trend. They are telling us, straight to our face, folks, that they are going to have stronger, longer lockdowns. Against your will. They already have solitary confinement of innocent Canadian citizens. We have the police arresting people on the street, beating them up in certain cases. And they are saying it's not enough. It is still too soon these measures to know whether these are strong enough and broad enough. And Trudeau already said that we can do more anytime we want to. These are such terrible, terrible things for the government to be doing. I'm going to pause just for a moment and ask Sean Tower, recognize Sean Tower here. Thanks for your generous donation of Studio Brûlée, Sean. Sean says, took the words right out of my mouth. Using safety to enforce regulations that would make the USSR blush. And now our government declare patriot boys terrorists, not Antifa. Jesus, I dislike this country. I am a disabled vet. We all have every right to complain about this. Because you're right, Sean, it is terrible what they're doing. This power grasp was obvious from the beginning when Trudeau took personal, sole power and control over Canada's entire budget for 8 months and drove it from almost a balanced budget to $100 billion, which in Canada is a large deficit. A large deficit. That's not $100 billion. I think it was $800 billion. I can't remember, folks. You have to look back for the numbers, but it's a large deficit for Canada. Somebody else had a question here. Simon Carter had a question. What's Simon's question? Do you think solitary confinement as punishment is unconstitutional? I have no idea if it's unconstitutional or not. It's certainly a form of torture, if you ask me. And I don't understand the penal system and all of the psychology and practicalities around that, so I couldn't tell you. But certainly, to my mind, solitary confinement, it would be a form of torture. Now, it's a form of torture. I wouldn't say that being confined for an hour or two in a cell by yourself is going to be solitary confinement. But when it goes on day and night for something like 2 weeks, that is a kind of torture. And that's what they're doing to Canadian citizens right now. Mind you, I'm sure they probably have entertainment in their TV and a computer. That doesn't change the fact that you're in a solitary confinement cell against your will for having done nothing wrong. This is completely unacceptable in any concept of a free and democratic liberal society. It is not, we do not have a liberal society. The Canadian government may call themselves the Liberal Party of Canada, but there's absolutely nothing liberal about it. They are totalitarian dictators calling themselves liberal, robbing us of our freedoms in the name of safety. It's a deceit, it's a trick, and it's working well for them. I don't know how we fight this, to be honest. I just don't know right now. So, where was I at here? Again, this thing is locked up on me. Sorry about that. Let me see if I put it down and up again. Maybe it'll work. Nope. Not working. Okay, so I've got to find out where I was at. Okay, we've got another one here. This is from the National Post, and I'm going to wrap up after this travel section here and the restriction of freedoms, because I do have two more sections, but I'll have to do it another day. There's just too much material to go through. I wanted to talk about the jobs and the economy and the actions that the governments are taking, which are counter to what we need for a lockdown, and to talk about Bezos and his recent actions. Absolutely terrible, that guy. So let's take a look at this National Post. It's the last thing we'll look at today, and then we'll wrap up. Canadians who travel outside Canada could be stranded abroad, Trudeau warns. This is January 22nd. Again, came in right after Biden's inauguration. The government has had travel advisories warning against any non-essential travel since the beginning of the pandemic, but some Canadians have not heeded the call. I celebrate you Canadians who have not heeded the call, because you're actually doing what we call civil disobedience. And this is the right time for civil disobedience. These totalitarians are trying to eliminate all of our freedoms. We need more people exercising their freedoms in a civil disobedience. They only grasped these powers using emergency, a fake, trumped-up, hysterical emergency as an excuse to grasp these powers. This is an illegitimate grasp of power being used to totally repress the Canadians and the Americans and everybody in the first world. It's terrible what's going on right now. Let's read from the top. This is in Ottawa. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau warned Friday that anyone traveling outside of Canada could face considerable trouble getting back home, as new evidence suggests some COVID-19 variants are both more transmissible and more deadly. Look, they don't know anything about these variants yet, but they're already whipping up the hysterical fear. There's nothing more powerful than emergency procedures that the people will be willing to accept in their name of safety. That's what they want. Power, and you're giving up your freedom in the name of safety. Let's read from the top here. No one should be taking a vacation abroad right now, except, of course, government employees and the elite. They can do whatever they want. Reading onwards, if you've got one planned, cancel it. Don't book a trip for spring break, Trudeau said outside of Rideau Cottage. Ay, ay, ay. We could be bringing in new measures that significantly impede your ability to return to Canada at any given moment without warning. These are the words of a totalitarian dictator. Trudeau is a totalitarian dictator. His behaviors have all been along those lines since he took office. Why Canadians? I do know why Canadians voted him in, because Canadians want tyranny. There's a huge swath of Canadians who have been trained since kindergarten through university that Marxism and totalitarianism are actually good. And Trudeau himself actually said he admired China's basic dictatorship for its ability to get things done. Trudeau wants to turn Canada into a tyrannical dictatorship with him as king at the top. Let's read this next part from the top. We are looking at a number of measures that can include further restrictions on international travel. I think I read this already, but I'll read it again because it's really important. This is what they're looking at. Additional tracing measures, additional quarantine measures, and enforcement measures in order to disincentivize people from taking unnecessary trips. Meanwhile, in the same period, Trudeau's own health minister was flying across the country visiting family members using the government jet. Let's read on. Blair said Canada's quarantine measures are some of the toughest in the world already, but the government would not hesitate to go further. Words of a committed dictator and tyrant. The Liberal government is a tyrannical government of Canada. And the nerve to put the word Liberal on top of that political party, that just tops it all off. So folks, that's all I have to say for today. I'm going to get back to these other topics possibly tomorrow and cap this off, because there's just so much going on. Biden's administration, they're busy trying to tear down the middle class, trying to open up the borders, trying to sell the U.S. to the globalists, and it looks like they're going to succeed. So that's why I keep saying we're entering in the 1,000 years of darkness. So with that, folks, I want to remind you, like I usually do something you love today, every day. And if you don't have something you love to do, find something you love to do and do it. Do it every single day. This is your life. No matter what's going on, you can still enjoy it. So with that, do check in with me tomorrow for the next part 2 of this First Days of Darkness. The First Days of Darkness and the tightening of the noose is what I call it in this session. Tightening the noose around all of our necks. So take care, folks, and we'll see you tomorrow.